Alright YouTube, this is Marcus with another video here. In today's video, I thought I would post an update on how I've got my mobile radios installed. I've got two vehicles, both of them have Citizens Band radios in them. Both of them are Cobra 148 GTLs. I've got a video going over this a year or two ago, I think about 2 years ago, when I had a Ford Explorer and this pickup, I believe, or maybe not, but anyway, I've got different vehicles now, and I've redone the installation, so I thought I'd go over them. So, in the pickup truck here's a Cobra 148 GTL. I have a static 636 noise canceling mic with the chrome cord, because the rubberized cords tend to stretch out over time with sunlight and heat, and so you end up with 15 feet of mic cord wrapped around your rear view mirror to take up the slack. So the chrome cords work out better for me. And I've got the mic hanger right here. There we go. Behind the steering wheel, so that this camera will not zoom out, so that while I'm driving I can just reach right here and there's my microphone. Alright, I've got RG8U coax because I just happened to have it laying around. If I hadn't had it, I probably just would have went with RG8X, but the RG8U coax comes out the back here. I've got a sunscreen up because the only place I could really fit this radio is up on the dashboard here, and so if I'm not in the vehicle using it, I put a sunscreen up to keep that sunlight from damaging it. But the coax comes out the back here, and I've got it kind of tucked down into that little space between the dashboard and the windshield. There's a space down in here where there's like a rubber bushing to kind of pad the windshield, and I just kind of shoved the coax down in there so that it's hidden and out of the way. And then it comes up, and I've got it tucked in behind this A-pillar, and I've got it strung up here. I've thought about taking a little tack or something and tacking it to the headliner here. I've never had anybody ever really even notice it. Rarely anybody ever rides in my truck, but I'd like to hold it up there. And then it goes over and it goes behind, I don't know if you guys can see it right there, but it goes in behind the plastic shroud here. And then I've got the excess coiled up in behind the seats back here. And what I actually did in this truck, I kind of wish it had a lot of vehicles have rubber drain plugs in the floorboards where you can run cables or drain out water in the event of an emergency. But this pickup truck does not. Instead, like in the passenger floorboard here, and pretty much all over, it has like a thick, clear, hard kind of lacquer. And there's no drain plugs that I could find. And so I figured, well, it's just no beat-up, dirty old work truck anyway, 220,000 miles. I'm the only one ever in it. So I don't really care if it looks pretty as long as it's functionally sound. So what I did was I went into the bed back here and I actually drilled a hole through the cab and the bed and just ran my coax through there. And I've got, you can't see it here really, I don't think, but I've got that plastic stuff. It's like a cable protection kind of stuff. I ran that around the coax, fed it through the hole so that the plastic stuff protects it, and then I just took and I pumped this completely full of rubber silicone and then pumped it all around the hole there, and especially the hole where it runs between the cab right there, so that no water gets inside the cab. I've tested it 3 or 4 times and I haven't had any water entry, so that's a good thing. And then inside the bed here, I just drilled a couple of holes and zip tied it up in behind the bed rail, and it comes to here, and here I just drilled a 3/8 inch hole through the top of the bed rail, and I put a heavy duty stud through it. Now this particular stud actually has an Allen wrench that fits into the female portion down there, so you can really crank down on this thing, but it uses the same size hole as a normal stud. It's just oversized on the outside with a larger washer and everything, so that it distributes weight better. I've got a locking washer in between here and this 6-inch spring. I've got a locking washer on the top here so that the antenna doesn't come untwisted. And on top of it there, I've got a 102-inch steel whip. And it does pretty good work. It does what I need it to do. When I'm not sitting beside a giant metal school bus, the standing wave is about a flat line. It's pretty close to caliber. Well, it's not too bad even next to the school bus there. About a 1.1, 1.2. So that's pretty good. But now standing wave does go up when I'm moving down the road, because the antenna itself will bend backwards at the top, and on top of that the spring wants to give a little bit. So the standing wave will change a little bit when you're in motion down the road, but it only goes up to maybe a 1.4, 1.5. Now before, I used to have this antenna routed the same way, but I had just the antenna connected straight into a regular stud, like what you might run a Fire Stick or something on. The problem with that is that it was not sturdy enough to support this antenna, so it would wobble, and it would the metal on the bed of the truck itself would flex. And I was hauling a grill one time just across the yard, and the grill fell over and hit it and bent it and fatigued that metal because it was so small in diameter, and it kept wanting to flex and fatigue that metal. So I bought the oversized stud to distribute the weight better over a larger area, and the spring to alleviate even more stress from the larger stud. And now the metal on the truck itself doesn't move a bit. So if you're going to run a 102-inch whip in any way like this, I really recommend using a stud like this so that it distributes the weight out better. But I just run a barefoot radio. I don't run any linear amplifiers or anything of that nature. I have the power cord here. You see I've got it kind of twisted like a barber pole. That's an attempt to try and cut out spark plugs and fuel pumps and things. I just figured, you know, Cat 5 cables are twisted together to eliminate crosstalk and interference, so the same theory should work for my power cord if that's where the interference is coming from. But I've got the power cord running behind here, and got it ran through the firewall, and then I put a little ring connector on the end of the wires here and actually pinched them under the bolts on my battery clamps here instead of just jamming them down in there, so that they're actually, you know, they're actually soldered, and they've got a little ring connector here, so got a much better connection that way. But right there it is. I've got it kind of zip tied up out of the way, and there's a rubber grommet right there. I don't know if you see it, where the wiring harness that goes through to the dash cluster goes through. So I just poked a little bit of a hole in that rubber grommet and ran my wires through there. That's usually what I do in mobile installations, because just about every vehicle has a rubber grommet in this same general area. So if it's not terribly difficult to get to it, I like using that. But that's my pickup setup. Now my wife's car is a little bit different. She drives a 2006 Ford Taurus. She also has a Cobra 148 GTL. You have to excuse the mud, it's been raining here lately. But she runs a Wilson 1000 magnet mount antenna. And her coax I ran down the edge of the windshield here. You can see you've got this wide area, like from here over and up top, where from the inside you don't actually see anything right here. So I run it down the edge of the windshield with these little clips to hold it over here. And need to get the hood repainted. The clear coat's starting to flake off. And once it comes down in here, it doesn't come forward. Normally when I would run a magnet mount like this, run down the windshield, I'd run it down and run it through that grommet. But in this car, it's incredibly difficult to get to that grommet, like the one I use for the power cord on my pickup. So what I do with this car was it just goes straight in right here, and it goes down in behind this fender. And there is, right there, you can see I've got some cords ran through. There's a rubber area right here, a grommet, that goes into the side of the car. And it helps with the wiring harness that runs your automatic windows and things on the door. But it also comes right through to down here in the floorboard. Now I'm not going to start dismantling everything, because it's a pain in the butt. And you've got to kind of use a stiff wire coat hanger to kind of fish everything through that first time. But this was still easier to get to than that other grommet where the wiring harness for the dash cluster goes through. So I ran my power cord and the coax for the CB radio through here, and I've got it all zip tied and pulled up under the dash out of the way, so that the end result to her is that all she sees is her CB radio right there. And I've got the bracket mounted up to the bottom of the dash here, and because the speaker faces down and it's pressing into the floorboard, I put an external speaker in her console right here facing up, so that she has a speaker that's actually facing her and not muffled into the floorboard. She had a regular static 636 mic with a rubber cord, but it stretched out, and I had a spare one with a chrome cord on it, so I just swapped out the cords on them so that she now has a chrome cord. She doesn't have to worry about having all that excess stretching out from heat and laying all over the place. So that's the setup on the car. Pretty similar to the truck, except the biggest difference, instead of running a 102-inch whip, is that I run a Wilson 1000 on the car, because there's not really a reasonable location on the car to put a 102-inch whip. I thought about maybe putting one in a fender back here or something, but then I wasn't totally convinced that this metal on this fender would be thick enough to take the force of a 102-inch whip flopping back and forth when you're going 70 miles an hour down the road. And so I figured this way, you know, I know it's not going to go anywhere. One thing I did do with this antenna, I don't know if you can see here, I got it used. So the first thing I did was I took it apart and I cleaned all the corrosion out of the inside of it. It wasn't in terrible shape, but there was some corrosion. And when I put it back together, I sealed all these connections with some hot glue, because they were not sealed. So what they would do is they would let water get in, but then once it got in, it couldn't get out. It would just continue to condense inside this cup and cause this big steel plate and your copper and solder and things to corrode. So I took it in the house, I dried it out really good, I cleaned everything with 90-some% rubbing alcohol, and then I put it back. When I put it back together in the house, while it was good and dry, I sealed all of the connections I could find with some hot glue. And this one was actually upgraded to RG8X coax instead of the RG58. The battery connections here, this is a project I was just starting the other day. The CB radio power cord runs through the same path. This isn't part of it, this is something else. But it all runs right here, and there's a low spot right here under this duct tape where it runs on this low spot so the hood doesn't impact it. I've got it all kind of zip tied down here out of the way, and you can see here on her battery I did the same basic thing. I soldered ring connectors onto the end of my wires, and then I pinched them. The bolts on the clamps on these go sideways, so I just backed it out, put the ring connectors under the bolt, and then tightened it down so that it's good and tight on the battery, but it's got those ring connectors connected to it and soldered on there with this anti-corrosion stuff sprayed on here, so that I've got a good solid connection and water shouldn't bother it that much. The grommet that you would use for the wiring harness on this vehicle is down in there somewhere, and I was just not able to get my hands down in there enough to mess with it. And so, you know, instead of taking half the things under the hood apart so I could move them and get them out of the way, I just figured out how to use this grommet right in there where all those wires go through anyway. Now, one thing I am going to do, since I just rerouted all this the other day, was I'm going to take maybe some brake cleaner or some solvent, nothing that's corrosive or anything, but something to get all the dirt and stuff out of here. And then I'm going to take a caulking gun and get some clear rubber silicone and plug the hole on that grommet, so that if it rains and some rain drips down in here, it's not going to run inside the cab of the vehicle. But anyway, well, also, yeah, I painted my wife's radio. I don't know if you can tell, it's purple, and I painted the knobs white and the screw heads are white, so that she has herself a nice girly CB radio for her car. But anyway, I just wanted to do an update video on standing wave with this kind of setup, about a 1.3-ish when you're going down the road. This antenna doesn't flex nearly as much as my 102-inch whip does, so standing wave is pretty consistent for whether you're sitting still or moving down the road. The only time it really goes up is like where right now you're sitting between a metal-sided house and a big metal school bus. But about a 1.3 consistently across the band, so no big problems, no major complaints. But anyway, if you guys have any comments, questions, concerns, or suggestions, feel free to post them below, and I'll address them as necessary. And yeah, this is Marcus out. Y'all have a good one. I did want to add a caveat to this video. Because this antenna is externally, there's some gouging here because I got this antenna used as well, and somebody used some pliers on it before. But one thing I did do when I put this together was I took a blow dryer and I put it together and I dried it out really good, cleaned all my connections with some rubbing alcohol, and when I updated it from the smaller stud to the bigger stud, I put dielectric grease everywhere there was a screw together connection. So there's dielectric grease inside the female portion of the stud in the bottom where the PL259 screws in. There's dielectric grease right here where the stud screws into the spring, and there's dielectric grease here where the 102-inch whip screws into the spring, so that the contact points at the very least will not get any moisture inside here to cause corrosion between the elements. Now obviously this is a spring. You can already see this is a brand new spring I just ordered off the internet. It's a Barjan spring. It's been on here 2-3 weeks. Sorry, and you can already see that there's some kind of little bit of, I guess it's just road dust or something, but it looks like some mild rust. I don't think it's rust. I think it's just dirt and grime. But you see, this is the kind of stuff that I wanted to keep out of the contact points, because if this stuff is sitting between where these and these made up, that's going to be an impedance bump that's going to offer resistance to the transition to the antenna itself. And so the dielectric grease helps keep moisture and other crap out of these important areas where the things connect, so that as much of my power as possible, my whole 4 watts, 12 or 13 with modulation, makes it into my antenna. And this kind of setup works pretty good. I don't know if you're familiar with Eastern Kentucky, but I live here in Salyersville, and when I'm coming home down the Eastern Mountain Parkway from Lexington, once I get to the top of Slade Mountain on a barefoot radio on AM, I'm able to start talking to my locals on their base stations with no problem whatsoever. I mean, that's 45 miles straight line from a couple of them, and I get 4 or 5 S units on my meter, and I'm able to talk to them just fine. One time I was coming home with my brother, and had the same antenna, but I didn't have the spring and the stud on it. But I had the same antenna, same coaxium radio, and I was starting to talk to my locals at that spot. He couldn't even tell they were in there, let alone talk back to them. So whatever I've done here seems to work, and all these little improvements I hope will just make it that extra little bit better. So anyway, I just wanted to add, there is dielectric grease between the connections of these different components back here at the stud. So anyway.